What's up, everyone? Welcome to a new episode of Retro Encounter. This month we're going to be talking about Parasite Eve. I'm your host, Josh Curry. With me is a wonderful cast. I have Kaylin Argyros.
Hi guys, Lane Kazero on the boards.
Peter Triezenberg.
Hello, everybody.
Returning for a second time, Chris Gebauer.
Hi, everyone.
And for the first time, Mike Salbato.
Hello.
Nice and short and simple. Wonderful. So like I said, we're going to be talking about Parasite Eve, so I know a lot of people are really excited for us to be talking about this game, so let's just get...
I thought we were talking about Trails SC.
Oh.
You don't want to talk about the sequel to your favorite game?
Spoilers!
Did I not get the memo that we were supposed to talk about bad games? I thought we were going to talk about good games.
I mean, we could talk about the Parasite Eve sequels, then we'd be talking about bad games.
Well, they'd still be better than Trails, so it's all good.
Wow.
Okay, we're going to get ahead of it.
It's so dangerous. It's so dangerous.
So like I said, we're talking about Parasite Eve. This is the first time I ever played it. So I'm kind of the newbie on this.
Ooh.
What about you guys?
I played it for the first time a few years ago and loved the crap out of it, but it's been a while, so I'm kind of approaching it with a, is this as good as I remember mentality going?
I played it when it came out, way back when on PS1, and I don't know why I never played it again, because I'm actually really enjoying it the second time around.
Yeah, same for me. I haven't played it since 1998, and I also don't know why I didn't play it again. So, but it's I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Sorry about that. I had played Parasite Eve 2 when it came out. Weirdly, missed the first one. And the game blew me away, especially with the cutscenes at the time. And then only started playing Parasite Eve, the original, a couple years ago. Bought it off the PlayStation Network. And loved it then. It crashed after beating the final boss, so I'm hoping that this time through, I'm actually going to be able to see how the game ends. That would be nice.
Yeah, I never played it because I thought it was a horror game. And if you guys have listened before, I'm not a big fan of the horror genre as a whole. I think it's usually either just jump scares that have no substance as a story, or they just kind of keep playing something and never actually becomes something beyond that. And so I never even realized it's like, hey, I didn't know this was an RPG. I heard like, oh, look at all these cool cutscenes, and you like see the screenshots back then. I'm like, yeah, that looks fantastic. Like that looks like it could be interesting, but I took it more so as like a Resident Evil game than an actual RPG.
Well, it's kind of both. It's an RPG that is a horror. It's a horror RPG, which there aren't a whole lot of those out there in my experience. So that's
horror
kind of
RPG.
Cool... That is
that kind of
your
balances on
phrase,
being
not
very
mine.
incorrect.
Yeah. So I know it's kind of stupid. I have a lot of stupid things though when it comes to like what games I chose to pick to play and not play. But I've really liked it thus far. It's one of those weird. It's in that time frame, kind of like Final Fantasy VII, where they have multiple different styles of where they're like, hey, this is game.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a cutscene. Here's a real cutscene.
Yes.
So I've enjoyed that.
Yeah, this is right in the middle of that whole slew of, like you said, Final Fantasy VII and onward, where the budgets for the effects were like, for you guys who played it at the time, I'm sure that the cutscenes just were phenomenal to see.
Yeah.
Just like I remember every Square game of the late 90s when those cutscenes came on, like, now we have plenty of games where we just want to play. But I mean, the spectacle of those cutscenes was always just mind-blowing and such a treat.
Yeah, I actually was surprised. The cutscenes actually hold up really well, I thought.
Yeah.
They actually do.
The cinematic direction is one of the things they were going for when they were developing this game, right?
Yeah.
Like they were trying to imitate Hollywood films, and yeah, I think they nail that like kind of explosive, action-y feel in a lot of ways.
Wasn't
But-
that a
Monster
buzzword
mutations
that they
are so-
used?
Yeah,
Cinematic
cinematic RPG.
Yeah. So they got it, I think, because it does definitely feel like a movie almost, a horror movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah, definitely.
it starts and it's like, this kind of looks like crap. I was kind of disappointed. I was like, oh, that's cute. There's a crying Eiffel Tower. Like, yeah, okay. And then it pulls into where it shows the limo, and it's like there was like this huge disconnect. Like, oh, this is gonna look rough. But then once they cut to that first like that opera scene when she started singing, I was like, wow, yeah, they actually nailed it. It's one of those things. The polygonal error is so hard for it to not just look terrible over time. And I thought it still looked fantastic.
Just quick little thing. It's the Statue of Liberty, not the Eiffel Tower, Josh.
Yeah, Josh.
It's been a really.
What country are you from?
It's been a really long week with school.
This is my city. Let's get it right.
To be fair, they're both French.
Yes, correct. There we go. A little history.
Nice save.
Learn yourself some knowledge.
Yeah, that's embarrassing. Oops.
Going back, the Eiffel, not the Eiffel.
See what you did, Josh.
I'm not the only one.
Okay. No, I was going to say the opera scene really sets the tone of the game really well, because you have that like contrast between like the opera and that like kind of synthesized MIDI voice that's playing, and then all of a sudden people are on fire.
Yeah,
that scene is phenomenally strange. I love it.
And then I is all like, I have a Beretta like in my dress.
Well, of course.
Move over,
you?
Guy who brought me here. I'm going to take charge of this situation, and it's a really great introduction for the character Aya and just for the game in general.
Okay, so one small nitpick: why doesn't that douchebag of a boyfriend date not explode into fire?
So she could hit him in the face and proceed with her day.
I mean, like the whole theme of like the first three. So, by the way, we're only talking about the first 3 days, so that everybody's listening. The whole theme of 3 days is like everybody that's in the general vicinity of this dies violently or turns into a bloodthirsty monster. Why doesn't he? Is he such a jerk that they're like, he's already a monster.
Well, do we ever see him again? Maybe he just spontaneously combusted after he left the theater.
That makes no sense.
We hear from Daniel in the cop car that the guy got away, and he makes a joke about how he's a wuss in comparison to her and all the rest of it. So we know he survived, even if he gets hurt. But technically, we only see people die, but they say, there are survivors from the events. It's just not as fun to show, to show off the cutscenes with people running away, and that's it. So they usually show everyone just dying.
I mean, this is a guy who's like, one of his first things he says is, aren't you happy I agreed to date you? Or, you should feel lucky that...
He's a scumbag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
I wanted to see him die.
I know.
I wanted to see him actually not die. I wanted him to become a monster so I could kick him.
See, in a way, though, I think it's more satisfying that he's not important. Like, he brings her there, then once shit hits the fan, she takes charge and kind of just get out of here. This is my show.
And there's something to be said about that. It stresses, I think, one of the most impressive things, definitely for the time, that there's a very strong woman protagonist.
Definitely.
She's with this guy who's trying to like impress her, like, look at me, I'm a big deal in the real world. And as soon as anything of consequence happens, he's not, and she steps up and becomes something memorable.
Yeah, tells him to get out because he's useless.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's why they treated him the way they did. Maybe it was just for comedic effect. Maybe they said, okay, logically he should be dead, but if we keep him alive, we can make fun of him later for being a wimp.
Agreed. And like you said, it creates the foil of her versus him.
Yeah.
She's useful, he's not.
But that's a good point, because I like not just Aya, but also Eve being the main antagonist. So you've got strong female characters on both sides. So it's like the unicorn is to have a strong female character that's the protagonist, but to have both of them, both the protagonist and the antagonist, be strong female characters is unheard of, really, in not just RPGs but in video games.
Even today, it's not something you really see even today.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm gonna switch to film. I thought that was one of the most impressive things about Frozen, is that you had the whole story revolved around 2 females, and that was celebrated. And it's 2015, or that was like 2013, I don't know. but it's still something like you don't see that in any genre of kind of storytelling. And so to have something in, we said it was 98, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes it even more impressive.
Yeah, I mean, much less in a video game from that era, like a '90s SquareSoft title.
Yeah, and a Japanese RPG, even.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about this game. I mean, I looking back on it, I don't think of it as a risk, but of course, maybe it really was in terms of planning all the rest of it to have the female lead. But it was also the first M-rated game for Square, and like, how is that going to be? It's kind of cool to think that it was the first in a lot of elements for Square at the time in terms of seeing what else they could do. New genre, trying to do the horror stuff like Resident Evil as well. I mean,
and then they did a whole bunch of like experimental stuff.
Was this the first game? Because I think this was made in like their Honolulu studio or something, but I'm not sure what else was made in that studio.
I don't remember which. Let's see if I can find out. But I know that it was the first major collaboration between Japan and a US-based studio, so it could have been the Honolulu one. That would make sense.
It says like Square EA when you open it up when you start the game, right?
Yeah, but I think that was just part of their publishing deal at the time, because EA was publishing them, so they had this LLC that was just for publishing. Something like that.
A large part of the production took place in the United States.
In contrast to previous Square titles, the development team for Parasite Eve consisted of both Japanese and American staff members, with a large part of the production taking place in the United States.
But it's not telling us which area.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I feel like it has a. That's a terrible sentence. It appears that there's a greatly different feel to the game than what you'd expect from a Square game. And you could make the argument that it's the genre. You could say that it's a different type of characters and whatnot. But I think it's more so the mixing of cultures in the development of the series that kind of more so would lead to that. And definitely the M rating, like that first time that the little rat like scurries in front of you and then it becomes this huge monster.
Oh.
That's like it does its fantastic job of like the first 10 minutes of that game. It like immediately grabs at you and sucks you in, like you want to keep playing.
David Cronenberg is just like silently nodding in approval behind the development studio.
Yeah.
That first mutation is absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, and so I'm guessing you guys don't remember because you've all played this game before, but I was completely caught off guard because it's like, all right, this is a Square game. I entered into combat. I am going to stand here. I'm going to do an action. They're going to do an action. And he shot me, or like the rat shot me. Like, oh, all right, well, whatever. And I like happened to like just drag my hand across my Vita, and she like moved. And I was like, oh, all right, well, I guess I can dodge these fireballs now. Okay. And that was a really cool moment too, because that's something that you don't see. It's still like almost like a turn-based, more of like an active time battle, but you're actually interacting beyond just like watching your meter come up. And so I actually really, really enjoyed that.
It's kind of a progenitor to Vagrant Story in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
Yeah, the dome kind of that expands around Aya, showing like this is your movement range, this is your attack range. It still allows for like a tactical approach to combat while still being like more fast paced and actiony than I think most RPG players would have been used to at the time.
And the transition into battles, or the battle screen, while the invisible walls are sometimes a little frustrating, it is smoother than, let's say, if we go to the Final Fantasy kind of comparison of cutting to your battle screen, and now these are the monsters, and this is your party, and let's get to it. It's a lot quicker, and it kind of tries to, in comparison to those other Square games, blend the action into, okay, now it's done. There's a slight readjusting of the camera. Move on with the game. Keep going after the mission. Okay, we triggered a battle. Slight adjustment. Battle happens. Go back into it.
I've always kind of wondered how much the development teams for Final Fantasy actually want to still do that, have those hard transitions, or if it's just something that's been baked into the series so long that they feel like it's a kind of a mainstay that has to be there.
Considering that they've gotten out of it in recent years, then
But I mean, it's like definitely during that time, I felt like that was kind of like, this is a checkbox we need to have. Like, we need to have, like, hey, you entered a battle. There's the music, and here's your victory music, and here's this screen shattering.
Well, part of that I think was because of how the assets were used. You had different character models for out of battle, and like take 7. Very big difference between the character models in battle and out of battle. So it made sense to jump to another screen because you had to load those assets. You couldn't do it seamlessly. And, you know, Parasite Eve was a bit more of a stylistic choice. The assets don't really change from exploration to battle, and maybe that was, like I said, stylistic, but now we're getting to the point where technology-wise it can be done, where the models can be the same between combat, and so there's less need to break away.
Well, it's probably not even just models, but it's probably a combination of you have 3 to 4 party members, enemies, spell effects. Like they probably couldn't have all of that going on at the same time with the environment around them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed you don't have roaming enemies like in Chrono Trigger, but it is kind of similar to the field transitions from Chrono Trigger, how it would just like the characters move into position and the battle starts without like going to a separate screen.
And interestingly enough, Peter, I was actually going to bring this up, is that it's directed by Chrono Trigger's director, Takashi Tokita. Yeah, so that's actually, I was going to mention Chrono Trigger and how those battles kind of play out a little bit more in that smooth transition.
Mm-hmm.
I actually didn't
know Sakaguchi
that.
Produced it, and apparently was obsessed with a detective story and wanted to make that for Final Fantasy VII. But which is why the opening is kind of more of a gritty metropolitan before it becomes an open world. Yeah. And then so he wanted to do a New York City-based detective story. And so he produced the game, but...
Oh my god, can you imagine, like, Cloud and Barrett being buddy cops and going around...
Good cop, bad cop.
Vincent was originally a private eye.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, oh my god, that would be awesome.
Isn't it? I think it's great how 2 of Square's best games from the 90s, Parasite Eve and Xenogears, started out as FF7 drafts.
Yes.
I know, isn't that crazy? Yeah, it's nuts.
Like that's so cool to me.
Although in Xenogears' case, I'm glad that it became its own thing, because it never would have it would have been taken apart piece by piece if it was a Final Fantasy game. Yeah, it would have been a bit too ambitious, which I think is what they said while it was in development.
I think I know we got to move on eventually from battle, but the other thing I like about not going to another screen is it's because... Hang on. Let me start over. I think the other thing I like and what works here, since your battles don't go to another screen, is that you can use, since you have to dodge attacks, the environment is different for every battle. Like, you can't just use the same tactics, like, okay, right, I'm just going to move left or right. It's like, it all depends on the room you're in. And when you're in a tiny room with a giant dog, or stuck in a hallway somewhere, like, you have to play differently for every battle. So I like that.
Yeah, a good example of that, Mike, with the alligator boss from the prologue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it transitions, it starts off where it's top down and you have some wiggle room to try and get around it. But then the main part of the fight is when the camera is stuck like angular at an angle where you are like you're confined to a very limited space.
I think there's enough there that they make huge changes. Like you start, I believe that's correct. You're in a building. I'm just gonna say a building. You're in a building. You go into a hole. You go through a hole, and then you eventually end up outside. And there's like interviewers. Like there's a constant both change of how you're playing the game, and then also the environments you're changing. I mean, at some point you're on a cart or being dragged by a horse. Like,
yeah,
I never would have guessed that. When I first started, I assumed that we were just going to be in that building the entire game.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, you jump into an eerie hole. Who jumps into a hole? And then who goes into a hole and actually finds, like, things in that hole?
Well...
The cop who will not be denied. And yes, we're ignoring what was said and how it can be interpreted. But, you talk about the horse, the cart, horse-drawn cart, or the carriage ride moment. hate to be like as the actual resident New Yorker here, but it's a really cool little element to be like, oh yeah, this traditionally kind of very holiday season type thing that a lot of people always say like you have to do in New York. Now it's kind of on its way out, but having the carriage ride in Central Park, and then that kind of very New York characteristic element becomes a mini boss fight, which really to me makes the environment of the game a lot more believable. Of course is a loose term, but it fits with the city and the idea of making a New York City story.
Yeah, and they hit all the touchstones. You have Carnegie Hall, you have Central Park. It's one of those things that anybody that's even semi-aware of that city immediately, even if you didn't say it, is like, that's New York City. It's very obvious. I call it the Eiffel Tower, but
we know what you meant.
Yeah, I mean, I still knew what city it was. It does a very good job expressing that very quickly. So I think it's impressive actually how much of the city you end up seeing.
Yeah. So as Chris, since you live in New York, does it feel like New York, or like, hey, this is some weird fantasy version of New York by someone who's never been there?
I mean, it is a weird fantasy version in the sense of the layouts of, let's say, the Natural History Museum. The main lobby does have dinosaurs, but it's the skeletons are in a different setup and all the rest of it. So in that sense, no, it's not exact. But and Central Park, do the paths take the exact turns and curves and bridges that they show there? No, but it does. What I will say is it does get the feel of those locations right.
Okay. Like
aesthetically, it actually, again, it's an interpretation of, but I think it does get enough of the core ideas behind, what Central Park is, like a fountain here with a nice path that goes along the edge of the park kind of thing. It does feel like a spot that I haven't walked through before, if that makes sense.
That sounds
a little bit harder, but to say that it's exact, because they're trying to make a very huge edifice into a few corridors for you to play through.
That sounds good, Chris, but I think Mike was really asking if we came visit you, would we encounter human-eating rats and alligators?
I mean, there are parts of the subway I have not been through, so you never know. There are enough giant rats that don't need to be mutated, if that's what you're asking.
They're scary enough. They didn't need to make a horror game out of them. They could have just set it in normal New York.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, every kids park growing up, you would, if you were going and exploring the corners, you would see the rat poison around, because they are legitimately scary when you're a 5-year-old child. They are a third of your size.
So
happy thoughts, guys. Happy thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So this
it's
next
not the size of dogs, and they don't breathe fire.
That is true. So there's a plus.
So one of the things I actually both find super interesting and I actually really strongly dislike about the game is the whole kind of storyline about the mitochondria.
So the plot.
Yes, I know. It sounds really stupid.
It is very pseudoscience-y.
So it's one of those things. It's really, really interesting because it's not necessarily something you'd normally see in a game, I feel like. But at the same time, I find it kind of confusing. And by that point, it's just like, well, this is kind of stupid. And just the chances of some of these things happening, what's his name? The guy that sneaks into New York to tell you that it was his ex-wife or his wife. That it's too perfect of everything.
I don't think it's his wife.
Well, I thought it was his wife.
No.
Maeda, the scientist, he's talking about the original Eve, but he never mentions a relationship with her.
No, it's just this is a thing that happened in Japan before, but on a smaller scale.
It was someone else's wife, yeah.
Okay. Scientists. Yeah, okay.
He's referring to the novel, right? Because Parasite Eve is based on a book.
It is based on a book.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's what it's here was this other thing that happened in Japan that's totally connected to what we're doing, except not really, because copyright is weird.
Yeah, this is supposed to kind of be a sequel to the book.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you guys see the movie? Not to go off topic, but...
No, I've heard of it. But
I didn't even know it was a movie.
But I assume it was based on the book.
Yes, I think it was.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Because when I saw it on IMDb, it had almost exclusively Japanese names, so I'm pretty sure it's just the book.
I'm on Wikipedia and it's based off the book.
Okay.
So
that's how we can get our prequel knowledge down the line.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that, like, I was kind of looking at stuff for it. I noticed that there was a book. I assumed that this was a retelling of the book in some regard. I didn't know that it actually served as prequel. That's actually cool.
Yeah, I've always thought it was too. And by the way, since you're on Wikipedia, do you know if everyone donated $3, this fundraiser would be over right now?
Oh, really? Yes, that's true. It'd be done within an hour. That's right. The price of a cup of coffee
say that every
is all we
time.
need.
I know. I don't know if you noticed because that fundraiser thing is like an entire page now, but
Yeah, it's annoying. But then again, it is also like the number one source of information in the world, so
yeah,
we kind of need it to stick around. I remember. Well, no, never mind. Way off topic. So
yeah.
Go
getting
ahead,
back-
Caitlin.
Kind of earned the right.
Well, no, so what about, is it just that it's pseudoscience that you don't like about the story? Or is,
To me, it kind of reminds me of, like, I don't know if I'm the only one who's ever done this, but if you go to, like, the Resident Evil wiki, they will have an in-universe explanation for how all the viruses work. Like, exactly how they mutate the body and, like, the symptoms as you're turning into a zombie or a giant tentacle monster or whatever. And that's sort of, and it's like, it's very, very, I mean, it's not even like, I'm calling it pseudoscience is giving it too much credit, but it is kind of like a weird hand-wavy fantasy way of explaining what's going on in that universe, and that's always how I kind of view the mitochondria. It's the T virus.
What's also interesting is, like, I mean, what I said at the beginning is that I played the second game first, and I might be misremembering this, but in comparison to Parasite Eve, the original, they do have a lot more notes to find that try to, like what you were saying, Peter, kind of magically explain everything and give you all that background.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
there is very little dialogue in this game, where they really explain things. I mean, and dialogue in general is pretty sparse. It's very concise and quick, as more of like a jumping point, or almost, the transitions between going from one location to the next. It doesn't really go that far. Like when you meet that first scientist in the Natural History Museum, he gives you maybe like 3 sentences of background, and everyone freaks out, and they're like, "Tell us more!" "Nah, get out of my office." It's like, okay, thanks, sir. You could make this so much easier for us.
And I wonder if how much of that is they're trying to mimic the pacing of a Hollywood film, where a lot of it is more focused on action set pieces than it is on plot. And then whereas Parasite Eve 2 was very much going after that Resident Evil style.
Totally.
Like right down to implementing tank controls and stuff.
Yeah, I know, which is the huge downside. But you're right. It's also, I mean, this game, the Parasite Eve 1, you could play in a day. I mean, you could sit down, start to finish, and play it through. It's an 8-hour, maybe 10-hour game, whereas Parasite Eve 2 is much more of like I think it's more like a 15 to 20-hour game. So it is a little bit more padded out that way. And maybe I'm misremembering that, so people can correct me.
And the less said about the PSP one, the better. But yeah.
Still haven't played it.
You're not missing anything.
That's what I've heard.
I don't know. For me, it's just the whole mitochondria is it's interesting because you start thinking about, you hear the whole theory, like, we're all from the same, like, you can trace everything back, and there's this one person from the beginning. Like, it touches, like, on all those kind of thoughts and those theories, and all of that's super interesting. But it just seems it seems very interesting and odd that even if you did have that and you were the original and anything of that you'd be able to blow up people and turn other things into, like, monsters.
For sure. But again, I do think the lack of context and more detail hurts the universe they're trying to create.
See, I'd actually say the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I think of Metal Gear Solid coming out in '98 as well, and you go through that game, and then you have the nanomachines explanation, and that is also its own kind of absurd.
Magic.
But they try to ground
perfect.
it. I mean,
Metal
I
Gear
love
Solid
it,
is
but
perfect.
we've had to talk before. I'm with you 100%. But they give much more context even though it's in monologues that go on for a long time, but they explain their world to you.
See, and so my big
buy into it a little bit more.
My big difference for me with that, if you were to draw the comparison to Metal Gear Solid, is Metal Gear Solid is a very different genre. And I think when it comes to any type of horror, scare, survival, any of that, I think the minimalistic approach works best. Because anything that you can develop in your own mind of why this is happening, why this is terrifying, what's around that corner, is 100 times worse than anything that they can ever say. And that whole mirage of what is going on dissipates as soon as you try to explain it. And so I actually think, to its credit, where the game chooses to not explain things or lead it up to interpretation, that's actually where it is better. And it's when they're like, hey, da-da-da-da, this is it, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where it's like, I wish you hadn't said that.
I agree, although what's kind of hard is that they also have an audience get liquefied, and you kind of just go, what? You know, in Central Park with the concert. And I'm not saying you need the full explanation, but it's also kind of like, so she can burn people and make them kind of spontaneously combust and just liquefy them? And it's just, like, to your point earlier, it's just thrown up to, it's mitochondria, don't worry about it.
But imagine if they didn't say mitochondria, and you're just like, this lady is insane, like, she's super strong, and somehow we have this connection. You're like, the whole story is about that connection, not the reason why this is possible. And you at some point,
that could be more fun. That could be really fun, because you just trying to figure out why can this thing do what it does,
right?
And it's just open-ended. Yeah, that would be actually really cool.
Yeah, I actually like it more that it's pseudoscience, but the fact that they try to ground it a little bit in actual physiology to explain how this happened is kind of cool compared to, we're going to talk about Resident Evil, T-virus. Just blame it on this magical, thing that turns people into zombies. I mean, I don't remember a whole lot from my high school biology class, but I remember mitochondria and their basic function, and that was a little bit cool to have them actually, be giving you a biology lesson. Because if anything like this happens, like anything even remotely like this happens in the real world, it's probably going to be based off of that biology more than some magic, drug that just gets out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because there's enough, and I worked in the field, I know what the government would do. But they'd be able to stop it pretty quickly. And so I agree, it would be much more something that is innate inside of us that they can't control. It's much more believable to have some crazy thing like this happen.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh, we all have different opinions about that, apparently.
Well, no,
which is cool.
But that's just how it works.
So I agree with your point about horror.
Yeah.
Like, it's always scarier. What you can imagine is always scarier than what you're presented with. And the beginning of Parasite Eve is probably the more horror-oriented part of it, whereas later on it becomes more, as the curtain gets pulled back and you find out more, I think it becomes more of like your plot twist-driven JRPG story, just with a healthy dose of body horror.
But that's true of a lot of games in the genre, because
true,
and just that by virtue of how the gameplay, how the story unveils, as you learn more and piece things together more, they get a little bit less freaky.
Yeah, because
that's why PT is perfect.
Like Dead
you're always
Space.
off guard.
Yeah.
Like your first encounter with necromorphs is super scary because you don't know what they are, but as you learn more about how they came to be, it's the mystery is gone, so it's more just like, oh, monsters, okay, shoot you.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's really a downfall of the audience. We would not be content to finish a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50-hour game and not have a conclusion with some sort of resolution. And we crave that resolution. We crave it so much that if it didn't have that, it's like the story's broken, I want my money back, you've completely screwed this up. And it's funny because then you'll have people come back around, it's like, oh, you told me too much, like you ruined it by explaining things. And it's like, well, they have to do it because there would be revolts if there wasn't that.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's why I think right now with horror games, and I'm like you, Josh, I'm the worst when it comes to actually enjoying a horror game. They freak me out. but with all the games that you can now download, whether they be the Slendermans of the world or
Five Nights at Freddy's.
Thank you, Five Nights at Freddy's, was it Outlast, and all those games that are short enough that they're not 40 hours, 20 hours. They don't overstay their welcome. Whereas the downside to a AAA horror game or like a Resident Evil in a lot of cases is that sometimes you just learn too much, and by the end, or what Caitlin was talking about, Dead Space is a great example. It's amazing atmospherically and all the rest of it, but you adapt with everything you learn, and then it's an understood enemy, and it no longer becomes just absolutely horrific. Yeah. There's a reason behind everything.
So typically in this time, I'd usually like to talk about what we expect for the rest of the game, but unfortunately, I'm the only one that doesn't know what to expect. So that leads a little bit less fun to this point. I mean, I think there's obviously a very obvious allusion to what's going to happen because Maeda, I don't know, like talks about kind of giving birth to the ultimate being. I'm assuming that's going to be kind of the main plot line for the rest of the Go, is Eve trying to make that ultimate being and trying to stop it.
Your deductive reasoning is strong.
Woohoo! I win a cookie. I know I just complained about pseudoscience and like too much. That actually sounds interesting to me, so I'm okay with that. But yeah, I think it'll be really good. One of the kind of next things I want to talk about though was kind of atmospherically how fantastic it was, and I think the main driving factor for that kind of goes actually with the music.
Yes. So this is not my first exposure to Shimomura. That honor belongs to Super Mario RPG, but it's one of my first experiences of her music, and I still feel like it's pretty distinct out of everything that I've heard from her. There's a lot of piano, and she uses a lot of piano in her work, but the one thing I usually think about when I think Shimomura is I think beautiful violin solos, and there's not a violin, I think, maybe outside of the orchestral version of the main theme. It's a lot of synths and percussive elements that are being used to create melody and more like atmospheric melody. It's like there are notes, but it also feels more like it's just to create an atmosphere than necessarily to make a hummable sound. And I really find that so cool. I like Shimomura a lot. Everything I've heard from her is good, but I actually would love to see her do more like this.
Yeah, to your comment on atmospheric music, I mean, especially the track playing in Central Park when you're going through, it feels like variations on the Halloween soundtrack, and as in the horror film.
That's an interesting comparison, yeah.
And especially at that moment where you show up and you have an idea of what's going to happen, you know, Daniel's like, "Oh my God, my son," and then you have this ongoing, tense kind of something's happening, this frantic progression. It goes on for a while. It's on loop, of course, but when you're going through trying to get there, I think it's a really cool play. And again, going back to the idea of it being this horror cinematic RPG. It does. I really like how they first. And again, I can't remember for the rest of the game, so we'll see how it goes through as we progress. But the variations on actual cinematic horror, it feels like they really took that to heart, and even in the soundtrack, which I love.
Yeah, Missing Perspective, which plays in Central Park and a couple other places. One of the best tracks in the game, I think.
Yeah,
for sure.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember a lot of later parts of the soundtrack, but like stuff like Primal Eye is the main theme, and the opera that serves as the opera track that serves as Eve's main theme, I think are both really memorable pieces. That I associate with Shimomura, even if they aren't like her traditional style. Like I could still you can still make out elements that are uniquely her.
Yeah. You know what I like? I mean, besides the music, because I do love all the music, the battle themes,
It's true.
Since we played to the end of day 3, you get back to are we spoiling things?
You can spoil everything you want.
Yes.
Cool, okay. When you get back to the police department, it's been trashed, and there's a part where you're checking it out and you're talking to everyone, and then they tell you it's like, oh yeah, hey, you better go find Ben because he's with this dog and the dog's not acting right, and then the music shifts, and
yes.
I forget which track it is, but it works so well, like set the mood.
Under the Progress.
Yes.
Yes, I love that track so much. It's the kind of sort of dry here. It's the oh shit track because it happens when shit goes down, and that is And I like and it's a great track because it's a variation of the theme that plays when the normal police station theme. There's the same sort of, I don't know, it's not a piano, but it's some sort of electronic synth that has that little melody that's played in there, which is really cool that it plays in the police station when stuff is going down, because it's referencing it's the same area but in a different context.
Yeah, I like. Well, what I was getting at, what I like, I don't know if anyone else really hones in on this. I didn't my first time through, but I noticed this time. But the atmospheric, sound effects. If you pay attention when you're walking anywhere, they're so good with just things like footsteps. I noticed it at the beginning this time in the opera house, because you're walking, and then when you get to the back room and you're walking on concrete, she has different footsteps. You're walking in the police department and there's broken glass. If you
I was going to say
walk
the glass,
over where the glass is, it's they were paid a lot of attention to details like that, and I like that a lot. Especially when the music is really low and there's not a lot going on, and you just hear creepy echoing footsteps.
Yeah, I didn't notice about the footsteps, but I noticed it about the lockers at the very beginning of the game. Those are some of the creepiest lockers in the world to open.
Oh, that sound, yeah.
Yeah.
That reminds me, another detail that I really liked was whenever you save, you use a phone, which that's kind of cool, but I like how you can see her kind of flicking her head a little bit, like she's shifting her head to get her hair out of the way so that she can put the receiver up against her ear. And I thought that was a really cool little detail.
Huh.
I've never noticed that either.
I didn't notice that either. That's super
impressive.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's like the... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I wonder if the smaller scale is what gave them the freedom to kind of put in those little details. Because, I mean, even in the Final Fantasies from that day, when you have Cloud looking like a bunch of Legos, then they wouldn't have allowed for that. But this game feels ahead of its time, in particularly in regards just to the little fine details we've all been mentioning, even for a Square game.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. All those things like Maeda adjusting his glasses. You see him reach for that, and that's neat that they were able to throw that in there, despite the limitations of the console and the system. It's apparent now, but it's still neat that it doesn't feel maybe as static and as bad as you would think just based on the graphics, because they put all that detail into movements and things like that.
And I do have to say too, in regards to the graphics, I still think pre-rendered backgrounds look good. There's something about that PS1 style of game with the hand-drawn backgrounds that just really appeals to me.
It can be a little jarring at times with character models, but I'm totally with you. I mean, FF9 is one of my favorite games, and I love just the pre-rendered backgrounds. They still hold up. They really do.
Actually, it made me thinking point and click almost, because I was furiously, tapping X a lot to try and find the sweet spot to interact with stuff a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Oh God, and that sweet spot is rough sometimes.
And there is a lot of walking around in circles trying to figure out how to get the game to register what it needs you to do.
Yeah, trying to get the zoo key, and I knew it was in that one room, and yet I could not figure out which locker or drawer, and then 5 minutes later, finally being in the right spot to activate the drawer in Central Park.
It happened to me really early in the game on this playthrough. I'm walking around this guy's burnt up corpse, how do I pick up this key?
I know it's on you.
This is I'm disgracing the dead here, but I really need this key.
He won't be that upset about it.
Hope not.
I mean, he's already had the worst day of his life, so.
Yeah, he got burnt to a crisp.
Oh, I thought you were saying that he had to go to the opera. Okay.
Oh,
that was the worst day. That was the worst day of Aya's life.
Worst.
I got jokes, guys.
I'll actually take you to a real opera.
Ooh, I'm
It was a
excited.
mandate. I just realized, but you're a taken man. I'm sorry, Joe.
Yeah, sorry. As long as you make me avoid all the humane rats, I'll go to the opera with you. I promise.
I have a friend who works as a security guard at our symphony hall, so maybe I'll get him to like protect us from the giant mutant rats.
That's all that
in every
matters.
opera house, let's be honest. Any music concert hall, it's giant rats.
Yeah.
So, did anybody have anything else they want to talk about for episode 1? I take that silence as a no.
I want a bigger inventory.
Yeah, I was actually
Yes.
going to say inventory and the weapon customization just kind of feels a little hollow.
I like the weapon customization. I don't like the fact that you also have to spend those like level up points on like basic functions like bigger inventory. I feel like that should be focused more on customizing your weapons.
I've never put any of those points into my weapons. They go only into my active time and my inventory space. Because I mean, like, I don't know. I'm gonna put points into a gun that I might get a better one in the next room of, or better body armor. Yeah.
But I feel like to me, and you could like feel free to disagree. I feel like it would be a better system to just increase your active time bar and inventory slots as you level up, or base inventory slots on like getting.
It does.
Yeah, but instead of getting the points, just have like a bigger.
I think he's saying that the increases you get in levels should be substantial enough that it doesn't. You don't want to increase it, or you don't even have the choice to because the system as it is does a good enough job.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah, and then the have the weapon system be a little bit. I don't want to say like have fewer weapons because that kind of takes away from the RPG-ness of it, but maybe make it like Resonance of Fate where you can swap out parts and stuff to make your own crazy sniper rifle with 26 scopes.
Yeah, it's just a cumbersome system to have to carry a tool or have a tool and then 2 items, and when you have a limited inventory space, that's now 3 slots.
With nothing stacking.
It's
exactly.
A stack, yeah. I don't know. I guess that's because that's the survival horror thing. You're used to having.
I think it's a little too close to the Resident Evil thing.
Yeah, it's like I get why it works there, and you have a little grid, and you have to make things fit in there. But I'm like, I don't really want to use a third of my inventory for a bunch of medicine, but I do.
Yeah, and the only way to do storage in this one is to go back to the police station, unless I missed something, or just leave it.
You can leave it in a. Yeah, leave it in a
Empty
random
chest.
treasure chest and come back for it later.
Instead of like a storage box that you find in multiple locations that's just holding things.
But that's kind of disingenuous because you don't really backtrack in this game. Like, you kind of go from zone to zone.
And then back to the police station as a hub, yeah.
Yeah, and you have the option to go back, but you never really, I don't think you ever really need to.
No.
Well, unless you want Taurus or Wayne to mod your weapon, which modding only means adding an extra slot to put another bonus in, and you have to give them a mod permit or a card for it, which is
yeah, it's a little gross.
Yeah. Does anyone remember? I forget, what is the use of the junk that you get, that you give to Wayne?
I know it does something, but I can't remember.
Like, I know it does something too, but the game never explains what it's for. Wayne will, say if you want, give me it, but he never tells you what you can do with it.
Apparently people farm it, so it must be important somehow.
Yeah. Maybe we'll find out
later on.
Later.
Yeah, I've just ignored it so far this playthrough. Just because I'm not sure what it is, and I don't want to waste my inventory slots.
It looks like it's some kind of like augmentation to like add like effects to your weapons. Like, I'm reading like acid, cyanide, and I don't remember if I ever even bothered with it on my first playthrough. So this is all kind of new to me.
But potentially, it does open up more customization if you get junk.
Is that like for like the post-game stuff then? Because no one ever gives you the option to do anything with it so far in the main game.
That could be it. That could be it too, because the post game apparently, like the optional dungeon that opens up and everything is wickedly difficult.
It looks like you have to get 300 pieces, and you get something.
Yikes!
Time.
So that's probably why you never saw it, because you probably never got 300 pieces.
Nope. I beat the game and was like, that was fun.
I actually had fun. Don't want to change that. Not going after the junk.
Yeah, no thank you. .jpeg.
300.
Apparently it carries over to new games, though.
Okay, so yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense then.
For Game Plus, though.
Okay.
That sounds like a 90s thing to do to make sure you play the game multiple times.
I do think it's cool that a game like this has like all the trappings you'd expect from a Square RPG, up to and including like optional bosses and little hidden secret systems, despite being such a short game.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's despite its brevity, it's still fully featured. It has like everything you'd expect from a Square title at the time.
Well, actually, just to kind of piggyback on that, do any of you guys feel the game being a little hollow in how linear it is, or are you okay with how it tracks from just moment to moment, set piece to set piece?
So, with the exception of like something like Skyrim, ignoring that, I'm always more partial to something that's linear. Almost every time, because I play for the story most of the time.
Sure.
And when you have a more linear experience, you can have pacing that works. You can have
and more detail.
Yes, you can have story that everybody's going to go through this hallway at this time after experiencing this. I think it's much easier to tie your music to specific notes, have the character go through a full range of emotions, anticipation, be scared about this or worried about this. You can't have those hollow moments. I've talked to somebody recently about this from the site, about like Fallout, and like you lose your kid, but then you're like, I'm gonna go build a town and do this and do that, and like you can't get sidetracked with their stuff. You're maintaining the main goal. I think it usually makes for a more cohesive experience.
Yeah,
I agree.
Especially with it being a cinematic RPG, you can't have a film that lets you meander. Otherwise, it gets it doesn't work really well. So, I think the pacing has to be like that, because it is in the end more of a story being told than a get out there and explore the world kind of thing. If it had been like a Final Fantasy, I wouldn't have liked how restrictive it is, because in Final Fantasy I would prefer a more open experience. But here, for a story-focused game, definitely I like the linearity.
And I can respect that, but I know it gets so much crap for this, but I thought 13 was fantastic with how linear it was at the beginning of the game.
Well, that's what...
Actually, Josh, I was literally just going to bring up Final Fantasy XIII.
Me too.
That's perfect. I think with Parasite Eve, explore when you have such a linear focus, it makes those little moments of exploration that you get that much more impactful. And I was thinking of Final Fantasy XIII's moment when you step onto Grand Pulse and all of a sudden there's stuff to do.
It's overwhelming in 13. Like it's one of those things. Like I don't know where there's just things everywhere. Like what am I supposed to do? And I think it's supposed to like the great thing about that when you have moments like that, it's what the characters are feeling as well. And I go back to when you have these linear experiences, you're going through the exact same emotional pull that your character should be feeling as well. And I think 13, when it puts you on pulse, like that is like, we are a place that we're not supposed to be. This is very foreign. You've had 30 some odd hours doing a linear game. It being open like that, it feels foreign to you, and I feel it fully encapsulates what you should be feeling in that moment.
Yeah, plus there's like an interesting divide between like the confinements of Cocoon and the grand open spaces of the free world, but that's another game for another day.
Yeah,
for sure.
But Parasite Eve does have like, there's like the warehouse where you can get some hidden weapons, and there's a secret boss, and then there's the whole post-game dungeon that actually gives you more story context. Like, that's all really cool, but I think it's made more interesting to me because the main game is such like a straightforward ride.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought it up is in just reading reviews from when the game originally came out, the big knock against it was in comparison to Square's other fare, whether it had been the 16-bit era or the contemporary PS1 era, it's so linear, and because of that, when you play it again, you're hitting all the same beats again, and it's not that expansive world. But I agree with everyone. Like, I love a good linear game because it allows you to add that much more detail. Like we were talking about all the atmosphere moments of sound effects, the sound design. If it was a much bigger game, I feel like it would have been a lot harder for them to get that nuance and just level of characteristic details to every environment. And on top of which, it's they don't have to build a world like you do in a Final Fantasy, an entirely new universe. It's supposed to be New York City, present day kind of thing. So now let's tell a story in this world that we actually can kind of fathom from the get-go.
Well, I think too, you don't want to look at it as a normal RPG like Final Fantasy VII.
Totally.
Which came before. It's like they're not trying to make that. Whether or not you like 13, I'm somewhere in the middle. I can never decide if I do or not. But what they were trying to do in 13, whether or not you like the story, they were focused on the story. And that made sense. If you're really saying we want to tell a story here, that was the way to go. And same here. Like,
that's what they did.
They're not trying to make a big, what you expect from an RPG. They're making a movie, really. You don't go to a movie and see it's like, boy, I like that movie, but I wish it wasn't so linear.
Thank you, Mike. That is actually exactly what I was going to talk about, because it's one of those things like everybody always complains about linearity, and it's like, well, there's no replay value. And it's like, how many times will people watch a movie repeatedly?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've played Last of Us 5 times.
So. Yes, I was just going to say Last of Us.
And you can experience a game that is linear, that the touch points are going to be there, but it's still enjoyable. Just like a movie, a book, a CD. Well, not CD. You could now, like, you know what I mean? If CD still existed. But like, there's experiences you can have that are built, that are crafted, that, yes, it's the same thing basically every time through.
But it resonates the same way because it's good.
Or it resonates differently because you're in a different place in your life.
Yeah, that is very true.
Yeah.
And like I always find that such an odd argument, because like movies, if you've ever watched a movie twice, then you can't, and you've enjoyed that, you can't complain that a game would be the same thing the second time through. It's the same thing.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say is that I feel like people expect different things based on the IP or the series.
Yeah, and the lineage of the studio.
I can like the linear experience in a game like Parasite Eve or Last of Us and dislike it in a series like Final Fantasy, because that's not what I expect in Final Fantasy. I do not expect linearity in a Final Fantasy game. Mm-hmm. At least not nowadays, I don't.
Or
I
like when
linearity in the story, but I expect the world to be, out there for me to explore.
And more of a playground.
Yeah. Or like when Skyward Sword changed up the Zelda formula and had much more confined spaces, and people were really upset about that.
A Twilight Princess that was already bad, even worse with Skyward Sword.
Twilight Princess was probably it was a step down from Wind Waker, but it was like a more open ocarina. But then Skyward Sword, instead of having a connected overworld, you had a hub and 3 separate big zones. And that was very clearly segmented. I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
Which is, I know we're off topic, I'm sorry. But that is weird, though, because Skyward Sword's big thing, at least for me, was that you didn't have to do all the dungeons in the game in a certain order. So you'd actually think if you were going to kind of break up the format of the game, well, parts of it anyway, like the interconnected world would have worked better. So I don't really know why they changed that part.
Yes, there's a lot of curious things about that, but then later on with Link Between Worlds, that was where they changed it up, but they did it right, where you do have total freedom to explore this world, but it's all interconnected.
Yep.
Josh hates Zelda. Josh hates Zelda. That's why
I don't hate Zelda. There's just better Zelda games than Zelda.
Link Between Worlds is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's very great. It's fantastic,
dude. That trailer for Hob from the PlayStation event, that looks really good.
Hob looks great.
Yep.
I agree.
Best Zelda game out there right now is Dark Souls or Dark Souls 2.
Okami.
We already had this argument.
Great.
You need to listen to the old conversations.
I adore that game.
We've had this argument so many times.
This argument comes up every 2 months.
So back to Parasite Eve.
My favorite Zelda game is Xenoblade Chronicles X. No, I mean, what?
Yeah, Zelda wishes.
So since usually when we get this sidetracked, I'm assuming that we're basically done for the night. So does anybody have any closing thoughts on Parasite Eve and kind of where they feel about where they are with the game right now?
Still a lot of fun. Holds up really well. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I'm actually enjoying it more than I think I did when I first played it. I don't know why. Like, I'm loving the battle system, and not that I hated it in the first time, but I'm like thinking, this is really cool. I actually would like to see more like this.
Yeah, kind of similarly to what you're saying, Caitlin. I feel like the first time I played it, it was a little off-putting, and it took me a while to adjust to the mechanics a little bit more. I don't know why, but playing it again, it just feels right in a weird way. I don't know. I can't even explain it. I just like it.
Parasite Eve perfectly captures the spirit of the holidays. Everyone is very warm and fuzzy.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire from this
Within?
Nope.
The fire is so delightful.
Oh god. Walk away from the light.
What about you, Mike?
Song was in the game. That would have been a good creepy song, like in a movie where you get like the little music box, and there's like a little girl at the end of the hallway or something. No, I'm liking it a lot. It's interesting that even though I pretty much know what's going to happen, like I get into a certain hallway and I'm like, oh no, I know I'm going to be attacked here, but you know what? It's still creepy because I don't want to get attacked right there. So even though you know it's coming, that's why I don't like horror movies or games anyway, but I feel like once you've seen it, it wouldn't have that effect anymore, usually. So you'd worry that the atmosphere won't seem as scary anymore, but it still is, I think.
The monster transformations gross me out so much still.
Oh, yeah.
The Shiva one, it's just like, ugh, God, it's so gross.
Yeah, the game's very effective at what it does.
Yes.
And so for my personal thoughts, I called this at the end of Deus Ex. I said that I assumed that Parasite Eve would be my favorite game that I played on Retro Encounter this year. And thus far, that kind of guess looks like it's going to be true.
Really?
Yeah.
Hey!
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm so proud of you. You've come so far.
You're so proud that I actually like a game that we cover.
But you like
I know,
Symphony.
it's like a revelation.
Yeah, so currently Symphony would be my number one. I actually think Parasite Eve will surpass it. And the main reason I think it will, we talked about this in the Castlevania podcast. There's so much there that is familiar. I've played so many of those types of games, and I think the brilliant thing, and this is also why I liked the last story, all I could think of was The Last of Us. The last story so much, it's so different. It has a very different feel, and that's the same reason I'm liking Parasite Eve. It's so different than anything I've ever played. But where the last story kind of fell away is like there was just so many imperfections in the game that it distracted me eventually, and it was too. I know it's a short game, but it was too long, so it stayed way too long. Like right. Parasite Eve, I think it's going to be the short, encapsulated story that captures that what I want to just be so different and so exciting. It's going to be such a short story that it's never going to overstay its welcome.
Yeah, and it's wholly different even from its sequels, like we kind of touched on earlier, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, and so I think it's going to be a breath of fresh air. I think that's the perfect way to explain it.
I'll be very curious to hear what you think about the rest of the game, because I do think you're going to enjoy it quite a bit. So, yay!
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, we ended the year on a good note. Woohoo!
We're not done yet. There's still time.
Positivity.
Yeah. Episode 2 is always my rough one, so we'll see. And I think we mentioned this before. Parasite Eve, we are only doing 2 episodes. Partially because it's a short game, partially because of the holidays. For December, though, we will still have 3 episodes. We're doing this kind of end-of-the-year bash extravaganza thing. It's going to be a bonus round, so if anybody caught the Blizzard Encounter, bonus rounds are going to be kind of side stories to podcasts where we either cover general topics like we'd probably at some point tackle that Zelda conversation and actually nail down what we think is a good Zelda and what it actually is a Zelda game. Or we can have kind of like long stories that we know we couldn't cover in a month, like, I don't know, like a Final Fantasy IX.
Sure. Oh, God.
Or like a Persona 4, which I desperately want to talk about. And then on the same time, we can do conversations like we're going to do kind of end of the year. We're going to talk about just all sorts of crazy stuff. But I think you guys will really enjoy it. So like I said, only 2 episodes for this, so just everybody's aware. in the meantime, that's going to do it for us at Retro Encounter. Please send your emails to retro@rpgfan.com. Be sure to go on the boards, voice your comments, thoughts. Go on to iTunes or any other your podcast listening venues. Please go on there, rate, review. We love seeing those great reviews. And then finally, you can find us on Twitter. Make sure, like I said, any way you want, send your comments in. We'll hear them. We'll listen. We'll either play the games you want or we'll try to include some of your thoughts. Thank you for listening.